So, one of the questions that was posed to me was asking for response to a, a story that came out a little while ago. This says 8 days ago. So I'll give the headline from the Time magazine story. U.S. judge rules Pablo Escobar's cocaine hippos should have legal rights. And so I was asked about this idea that I'll read another headline, which is actually maybe more on topic than Time magazine, not surprisingly. Pablo Escobar's cocaine hippos are people too. First of its kind ruling comes from the U.S. federal court. So this idea that there was this ruling that says hippos are people. So it brings up several interesting things. First, the first thing it brings up is don't believe exactly what you read when stories like this come out. From the time this story first came out and I saw it pop up, I read the first couple of basic stories. I'd been sitting and waiting mostly because headlines like that almost always the first thought should be is, okay, so what's the rest of the story? There's got to be more to it than that. They don't just out of the blue decide hippopotamus are people. Okay? Especially when you go, hippos are people, but chimpanzees are not. What? Okay? So one of the things you've got to just train yourself. Your first reaction to every news story should be skepticism. Especially right now. The news has never in my lifetime been as horrendously untrustworthy as it is right now. Clicks are so easy to get that the news is really about clicks. It's as bad as any Facebook post, any flash crap that's out there. They're driving much of their revenue off of the ad space they get from how many people click on it. So the news has become as bad as anybody else at writing the story, especially the headline, in such a way to just get you to click on it. So be warned that the headline is likely to be wildly misleading. So if you start with that position, my first thought on reading the headline alone, matter of fact, the first little bit, I read the headline and just flicked past it. I'm like, I'm not even reading that. I'm waiting till there's a halfway credible source before I even look at the story. Okay? And no, Time and Newsweek and Fox News and CNN, none of those are credible sources because all of them care mostly about clicks. Okay? And so because of that, I let it go. But what popped in the back of my head immediately was one of several things. Either, one, that's not what the ruling means at all. That's what it sounds like it means, and so it really doesn't mean that. This is a set of reporters who've read something into it that doesn't exist. Two, it's a judge who's gone off his flippin' rocker, which happens all the time. There are tens of thousands of judges in America alone, and if you think all of them are logical human beings, if you think they're logical human beings just because they're on a federal court or something like that, you're wrong. It's just plain nuts. They come out with things that are absolutely insanely crazy. They are human beings. They are a collection of human beings. Gather 10,000 human beings of any sort. I don't care who they are. Gather 10,000 human beings. You're going to have some utter nutballs in that group. And they're going to say crappy, wacky, crazy stuff. That definitely popped into my head. So, those were the two primaries. And so what I was waiting for and looking for were some credible sources. So one of the things I did is I went looking for a legal source. I went looking for, and to start with, one of the things you should always do is go find the ruling yourself. Go read the actual ruling. This one's kind of interesting though, because this is the actual case. Community of hippopotamuses living in the Magdalena River versus Ministero de Ambiente, excuse my French, de Desarrollo Sostenible et al. Okay, so one of the questions I had was, wait a second, these are hippopotamus in Colombia. Why are we having rulings about hippopotamus in Colombia? No U.S. judge can declare a hippopotamus in Colombia a person or otherwise. Okay, so what does the ruling actually mean? Well, as you might imagine, the hippopotamus did not show up in court. They didn't file the brief. They didn't write the brief. Matter of fact, they didn't hire any lawyers or anything. What this actually is a group of people who care about these hippopotamus. So a little bit of backstory of the hippopotamus. So you have Pablo Escobar, drug lord, nut. People with ungodly amounts of money, especially money gotten too easily, seem to go nuts with the way they spend it. And so it's not good enough for them to have dogs and cats or normal exotic things. They go nuts. Be they, I'm not saying he didn't deserve his money, but be they Michael Jackson and his zoo, or be they Pablo Escobar and his hippopotamus. But he decides he's going to get hippos. Part of the reason he gets hippos is because if you're a drug lord, you have lots of fears about who's trying to kill you. And people are trying to kill him all the time. So you build a moat around your place and you stock it with hippopotamus, widely considered the most dangerous animal on earth. So, okay, that's an interesting thing. And the problem is eventually Pablo Escobar gets caught. They go in, he gets captured, they haul him away, and nobody bothers to do anything about his hippos. So they just leave them. And his hippos breed like crazy because Colombia apparently is a very appropriate place for hippos to live. And so pretty soon there's over 100 hippos in Colombia. You have a full breeding population. It's the largest population of hippos outside of their native territories. So you have this group of hippos, and the government decides, well, it's time to do something about the hippos. And the natural thing to do is kill them all. Probably the most logical thing to do. The correct thing to do is kill them all. They are not native to this location. And they're doing significant destruction to the local area. So it's a significant problem. And this is, this isn't rabbits run amok. This isn't even wild pigs run amok. This is hippos. So it's a giant problem. And so they decide that they're going to kill them all. But of course, this is the era we live in now, where there are people who care more about hippos than care about animals more than human beings, that's for sure. And so we decide, no, we can't kill the hippos. So instead we decide we're going to sterilize the hippos. So the people who want to stop the killing of the hippos decide that they've got to come up with an argument for stopping the hippos, and somehow they manage to get that done. But then when they say, okay, we're not going to kill the hippos, we're going to sterilize the hippos, that's not good enough for these people either. Now they're pissed off about how they're being sterilized. So they decide that they've got to get involved with how the hippos are going to get sterilized. But this is Colombia. The number of hippo experts in Colombia is limited. And so they decide that they need to get outside experts involved in Colombian law to decide whether or not you can sterilize a hippo this way versus that way. So they want to do that. The problem is as in most countries, there is the limited ability to involve experts who aren't within your jurisdiction. Courts have rules about who they can listen to and who they can't. And largely they can't listen to people from outside their country. So they decide that they need to get these experts in. And so, to do that, they decide that they want some U.S. experts involved. But they want to force the U.S. government to allow U.S. experts to be involved in this thing, U.S. government experts. Why we have governmental experts on hippo sterilization, there's a whole other topic. But they want to get this information forcibly released so that it can be involved in the Colombian dispute. The problem is in U.S. court, to force something in U.S. court, to take advantage of the U.S. courts, to make the courts do something, you have to have standing, which means you have to have legally, this thing called standing, which is basically the case, has to involve you. Okay? So, for you to petition a U.S. court to force somebody to do something, you have to have standing. The problem is this set of Colombians does not have standing in U.S. court. They don't have standing in U.S. court because nobody's trying to sterilize them. So the U.S. court says, we don't have to listen to you because you're not involved. This doesn't even affect you. You care about it, but caring about something is not legally standing in a U.S. court system. That doesn't matter. So what they do is they petition the court specifically on behalf of the hippos. Well, the problem is that animals don't have standing in U.S. courts either. Okay? That's this whole idea. The only persons involved in the case have standing in a U.S. court, and so if the hippos are going to do it, the hippos have to be deemed persons within the U.S. court system. And so, for the first time ever, these people, and it's interesting, the judge, if you read the actual case, the judge lumps the people in tightly with it. Basically, these people from Colombia are going to be deemed to have standing on behalf of the hippopotamuses. Okay? But his ruling can be read to say the hippopotami, I think that's correct, but apparently this said hippopotamuses, so have standing to force this transfer of power. Now, the interesting thing that's going to happen is, as of right now, it hasn't been challenged. And the question, number one, I could not find a very strong write-up currently. We're only 8-9 days past this. I could not find a very strong legal reaction to whether or not this really is precedent-setting. Right now what I found was the case itself and a group of articles and one quasi-legal response, and I'm saying it quasi-legal response because the last line of this guy's response, without me digging into who this guy was, his last line of his response was basically, well, maybe now the court system will finally get around to deciding poor people have standing in the court system. Which says he's not serious. That's garbage. That is platitudes. That's BS. That's not reality at all. The U.S. court system very much. Do they have the advantages a rich person has? No. But the idea that a poor person doesn't have legal standing in a court case is such utter nonsense as to invalidate everything else he had to say about the case. It means I don't believe anything he says. He's a hack. And so if you're out there and you read this and you know who you are, you're a hack. Don't include crap like that if you want me to take you seriously, and I'm trying to find out something serious about this. So what I have not seen is any law school briefs, any strong legal organization responding to what sort of precedents does this really set? Did it set any? Does it really say what it says? Because in these things, if it has precedents where where an animal's being deemed to have personhood, that seems like a big deal, but the interesting thing to me is so far, the legal world has not bothered to even react. Which suggests to me at the moment that it doesn't mean that. That it's so narrowly defined in this one case as to not mean what the headlines say altogether. Because that would be earth-shattering. And oh, by the way, there's been a history over the last 30 years or so at least, probably longer than that, but at least 30 years of people trying to get animals personhood status. So it's very much, the animal rights movement has pushed very hard, for instance, to get personhood status for animals in testing facilities, and they started most directly with the animals most similar to human beings in ability. So animals that demonstrate science fiction principles of self-awareness and these ideas, that to be able to say, okay, this is an animal that is most closely related to us, and the courts have blatantly, obviously rejected that argument in their entirety. Now, we very much cut down on animal testing and some of these sorts of things, within our country on the basis of changing ideas about animals and moralities, but not from a legal standpoint. You can legally test on animals in this country. There is no doubt about it. Animals are property in this country, and they do not have standing. And so this to me is more, it is interesting. But as of right now, what is my response? My response is it's not time to have a response yet. I would say I have a fairly strong legal mind, but I'm not trained in the law enough to evaluate a ruling of this fine. And so I've been waiting to see who else is going to respond. And honestly, the fact that we are 8 days plus later and there hasn't been any response is intriguing to me. Because I still leave open the possibility that what's going to happen is I don't think there's going to be a direct challenge of this ruling. The reason why is I don't think the people who are being forced to give their information about sterilizing hippos over to anybody is putting up a fight. I don't think that they care. So they're not going to challenge this ruling. So because of that, I think this is going to go dead for a while. I think this is going to just sit there for a while, unless the ruling is more egregious than it appears on its face, and a secondary court at a higher court decides to reach out and grab that case and knock down the precedent, which happens. Courts can say, no, we're not going to let that stand because it sets precedents for the future that's bad. And I'm not seeing any reaction that looks like that at least yet, though those things would percolate through legal groups for a while before they would happen. Because it's not, I know of cases where ruling is so bad that the next court reaches out nigh on immediately, within hours, within 24 hours, but usually what that is a case where the ruling has negative ramifications that are so direct and immediate that the higher court feels a need to interject immediately to stop those things from happening, to stop it from wrecking a company or a group of people or these sorts of things. And they're going to reach down and go, no, that's a bad ruling. And sometimes they say exactly that. We just overturned this ruling. Bang, just like that. But more often they go, no, we're going to stay that. We're going to pull that into our court. We're going to do a review of it, and we're going to hand a ruling back down to the lower court, because that's the way our courts work. Is most of the time they don't change the ruling. They send down instructions to the lower court to change their own ruling, basically saying you must take this into account, and this into account, and this into account, and give a ruling again. But what they're saying is you better change your damn ruling. Okay? In this case, so far I'm not seeing that. So if I were betting right now, what I'm betting is that the headlines tell you what the environmental movement thinks of this and what they want of this. And so what I suspect to have happened is, I suspect right now there are some new cases brewing out there that are percolating to come to fruition. That what they're doing is that they're going to sue someone somewhere. There's going to be legal actions taken on the basis that animals have personhood based upon this ruling. That's when it'll blow up and get reacted to and all those sorts of things. And we'll see how the current ruling plays into that and how that gets dealt with on the basis of that. Because right now, at least what I'm reading, the fact that 8 days later I can find basically nothing other than regurgitations of the same story suggests that it didn't do anything direct enough right now for there to be any response. I suspect this will be percolating out there, waiting for somebody to do something, say something, a court case to get filed based upon this. I would say that's my largest bet. My secondary bet to this would be is that this is so weak and means so little that we'll never hear anything of it again. It made a nice headline for a day and it'll just go away. Because what'll happen is the environmental group or the animal rights group is going to go, we've got this, so now we want to sue on behalf of them. And their lawyer is going to go, no, you read it wrong. Don't believe the headlines. It doesn't mean that. And so they won't bother, they won't take the time, they won't offer themselves up to do the work to actually do anything on the basis of it, because it's such a narrow ruling that it actually means nothing. because just because a legal thing makes headlines does not mean it actually means anything. I am going to set this one in the back of my mind because I know I have some contacts that I run into, people who with very strong legal minds, people who are much more involved in things like this than I am, and what I'd like to know from them is whether or not they're aware of things that are percolating out there or whatever that will pop up at some point in the future. I know that might not have been the most rewarding explanation from me, but that's what I see.